Hey everyone, Mitch here. I just wanted to make a more condensed video that encompasses everything that has to do with this build. A lot of the information has been sort of getting disseminated between the comments and then having to write answers and replies. I would like for the information to be contained in the video and as a whole so that no one's misinterpreting or getting lost between comments and figuring out maybe this is better or whatnot. So that's the purpose of me making a new video. So I'm sorry again that if you're watching this as a prelude to the last video that I just made, that you'd have to watch it again. I'll leave timestamps in the description so that you can jump around and sort of get to the points you want to get to. But the goal with this is to first and foremost explain the fundamentals of the build so that people understand what's happening and why things are working the way that they're working, and also to sort of comment on changes that this build makes in comparison to other Frostclaw Nova builds. And this is going to be in part due to some comments that were posted on my last video where people brought up some valid points that I've gone ahead and tested. So yeah, without further ado, let's jump into it. First and foremost, I want to give a huge shout out to Masson. Apologies again if I'm mispronouncing your name, bro. And SMK, the original creators of this sort of build. They're the ones that sort of inspired me to take it and run with it. I'm having a lot of fun with it, and it's the only reason I'm really still playing Last Epoch as of right now, with PoE on the horizon. So it's occupying a lot of my time, and I've really enjoyed sort of min-maxing this to the best of my ability. So at its fundamental core, what this build strives to achieve is essentially clearing screen-wide worth of mobs and monoliths by virtue of Frostclaw proccing Elemental Nova. So by getting a lot of points in Frostclaw, you're able to spec into this node here called Celestial Conflux, which has a chance to proc Elemental Nova. Now these Novas, although they do damage, we don't actually care about it. What we care about is scaling the AoE and applying spark charges. Now spark charges are what the actual damage is coming from. So when you apply a spark charge to an enemy, it has a chance to explode, or it will explode, and that's where the damage comes in. So because we're wearing something called Fragment of the Enigma, every point of int that we get +2 flat lightning damage to spark charges. So as you can see here, I'm sitting unbuffed at 165 int. If I flame dash and proc my Adjure with Star Dial, I'm almost at 200 int. So that's a ton of extra spell damage to spark charges. So when you're mapping and you're killing things off screen, that's where the damage is coming from. The single target damage is of course coming from Frostclaw. We're scaling lightning damage, crit, multi, all that stuff. So that's why the build is able to do things like clearing monoliths and killing bosses. It's just a great all-around build. So getting into the sort of changes that I've introduced or applied to the build based on the comments and what people have been talking about, I've gone ahead and tested two things that have changed since my last video. The first thing is the copied scrolls. Now I've been playing a lot with Elementus Call because I was under the assumption that we don't do damage with rare ones, so why would we care? And someone pointed out in the comments that, including Machin, by the way, so thank you to both of you, you know who you are, that copied scrolls actually does have value because you do have a chance of repeating your rare ones. So what this means is that, as per stated, you will get a 10% chance per stack of runic energy to repeat your cast, which means that if you are sitting at, let's say, 9 stacks and you cast your rare ones, I will not go to 1k, I'll go to 2k ward, like this, meaning that it double procced. You get twice the amount of ward, which is viable and useful when you're mapping. Contrary to what I had before, which means that Elementalist Call provided you some pen and some extra area for your next Frostclaw cast after casting Runic Invocation. Also gave you some cast speed and some current mana as ward. So there's an argument made to take both. I will let you, the viewer, decide which one you want. If you really want to micromanage how much damage you're doing and like min-max it to the utmost limit, Elementalist Call does provide you more damage to your Frostclaw, so it has some synergy. In general use mapping though, I do think that copied scrolls does have value. It definitely provides the most inherent bonus to your ward, which in turn just gives you more survivability, more EHP. So there is value in taking both. So I will let you decide. The second thing, as you'll notice, is I've dropped Static Orb. Now, Machin, the original build creator, commented on the last video and he said, well, Lightning Aegis isn't actually as beneficial as you might think. When you take that threshold of damage, you lose Aegis immediately, which means that when you're pushing higher corruption, you will take damage more often, meaning that your Lightning Aegis will not be as up as much as you think. And that is a very valid point, right? The uptime on that DR we want it as high as possible, which means that not having control of its duration anymore because you're taking damage lessens the actual impact of Lightning Aegis, which means that if we're willing to sacrifice Aegis by removing the beta decay point in Flame Rush, we can completely abandon Static Orb, and we can opt to spec into Flame Ward, which does give us a manually activatable DR bonus from a Flame Ward's inherent 30% DR against hits, and then you can spec into an additional 40% DR, and then you can get some lightning or some elemental damage as well. So I played with it a bit today, did some high corruption. I think I'm sitting at like 1560, and it does feel pretty good. Having agency over when you activate your DR and knowing that it's going to be active is very beneficial when you're pushing corruption, because you sometimes preemptively know damage is going to happen and you have more control over when that DR gets activated. So speccing into Flame Ward is really nice. You want to take these nodes here. You can take 2 charges, which means that, you know, so you can sort of have a decent uptime on it as you can rotate through those charges. And all around, it's a pretty good experience. The additional points you can take in here is like Dilation, costs less mana, lasts longer, but everything else is sort of filler. The thing I was thinking of was making it spec into Lightning so you can take advantage of the increased lightning damage while it's active, but then you would have to figure out how to change your combo from Frost, Fire, Frost, because Flame would be Lightning, which means you'd have Frost, Lightning, Frost, Lightning, Frost. So you'd have to do some weird jank stuff with your action bar. I don't think it's worth it. I think the build has plenty of damage as is, so this is sort of the Flame Rune tree that, or Flame Ward tree that I've spec'd into here. As for talent points or what's important, like I said before, getting points on Frostclaw is incredibly important. Making sure you have Celestial Conflux and making the mana cost as low as possible is super, super beneficial. You will run into mana issues if you are not taking points like the Spark of Celerity here. And yeah, generally you want to have minimum 26 points in Frostclaw to take full advantage of all of these talent points. If you happen to have less, you can drop the Spark of Celerity here, but your Frostclaw will cost more. Runic Invocation, again, making sure the mana cost is as low as possible by taking 4 points in Attuned Approach, really, really good. Immutable Order, there's been some comments on other videos I've seen that like, why would you use Immutable Order? This is literally why the build is so nice to play, is because of the quality of life bonus that Immutable Order gives you. Making sure that you have your action bar set up where you have a Frost, Fire, Frost ability, and regardless of what order you decide to put, is how this works. If you don't like using Frostclaw on right click, you can go ahead and rebind these skills or put Frostclaw here and bind this to a different thing. You can configure your keybinds as you wish, but just make sure your action bar dictates the same combination you need to cast for rare wins. The other issue a lot of people were, not necessarily in my last video, but a lot of people that are talking about online when it comes to Elemental Nova Frostclaw is the use of Unstable Core. So the difference that I've made in this build is that I am taking advantage of the double damage or double effect of lightning damage if you're over 300 mana. So the main, I guess, concern is that since we're taking in this build the mana blessing instead of the shred blessing from Lagon, that you're missing out on that shred damage. Now it's very hard to calculate whether or not that lack of lightning shred is worth taking over this lightning damage doubled if you have over 300 max mana. So if you wanted to take Lightning Shred, the only point you could take it in would be from Lagon, which means that you would lose that mana and effectively lose the 300 mana threshold, which means that you'd need to find some way to get above 300 mana. The easiest way to do that is from Unstable Core, of course. It gives you a huge amount of mana, and it gives you points to your levels on your skills, which on the surface is not terrible. But when you compare it to the upsides of Static Shell, I personally don't think it's worth it, and I'm going to explain why. So when you're pushing higher corruption, that % armor against shocked enemies actually comes to be really, really important, because you want to have more defenses that this build otherwise doesn't really have. As you can see, I'm sitting at 1500 armor, which is 30%. If you have 145% more of that against enemies, that's a lot more beneficial to you when you're doing monoliths, as you're probably not going to die as much. The static charges when hit, static when hit is completely irrelevant. We don't actually care. The shock chance is nice. Lightning damage to shocked enemies, again, that's also a big bonus, but like I was saying, there can be an argument made for people using Lightning Unstable Core. It's just a matter of what you think is probably better. As far as I know, there's no damage calculator yet for Frostclaw or the sort of interactions that we're doing with Elemental Nova and stuff, so there's no way to really tell what's better. It's sort of Feelycraft bullshit, but again, I will leave this up to your discretion whether or not you think this is worth it. Just keep in mind that Lightning Shred is a very high source of damage. The only other way that we're getting some similar effect of Shred right now is through Shock. We're maxing shock stacks on an enemy or a boss. That is effectively also lowering lightning resistance and allowing us to penetrate more. So it's sort of the trade-off. If you want both, drop the Mana Blessing, get Shred, and then you might potentially want to wear Unstable Core if you want to benefit from these double nodes. As for rolls on your gear, one of the changes I'm going to be making for the gear, as stated by or mentioned by Machin, when you're pushing higher corruption, and this is sort of known to everyone, is the highest sources of dot mitigation you can get in the game are Eternal Gauntlets, which give you a flat amount of armor, which is huge, and then the implicit of armor mitigation also applies to damage over time. So these gloves, or this base, is going to be the best base. It's going to be very hard for it to beat something like Swaddling the Erased if you have max rolled int, purely because that more spell damage to low health enemies is really nice, the cast speed's nice, the attributes are really nice. So ideally you're looking for T7 int on these with some cast speed, and then you want to get the hybrid reduced armor taken from crits or whatever it is, armor or reduced damage taken from critical strikes, and then resistance you're going to need, because this build does struggle with resistances. And then as for the amulet, same amulet I'm wearing basically, except you want to try to get it on an Oracle amulet if you can. That's the only other base in the game that provides a high source of less dot or damage over time taken. So with those two items, if you're able to get them, that should bring the build up to a place where you are a lot tankier in certain situations in high corruption. If you aren't able to get them, feel free to wear a Swaddling for now, and just look to swap into a pair of gloves like this should you come across them. As for slams on legendaries, Prismatic Gaze, obviously you want int and some other mod. My favorite mod would ideally be increased spell crit, double if you have over 300 max mana, but if you happen to slam a resistance you need, all the better. On your Alchemist Ladle, you want cast speed, multi, and lightning pen if you are able to get it as a fourth mod. I don't know, pick something you think is relevant. As COF, I don't have access to those kind of items, so I'd have to find one, and I don't have one. On Static Shell, you want int, and then some other relevant mod. You are able to get things like increased lightning multi, I believe. You are able to get resistances, of course. I'm not too sure what your other mod would be. You can look to get increased reduced damage taken from crits as well. I think I put it in the planner here. Yeah, increased spell crit. Increased spell crit's nice. If you feel like you're already capped, feel free to roll something you think is useful. I don't think the Static Shell 3LP is something I can ever look to achieve, but should you be rich enough on the marketplace, feel free to buy one, and then I guess you decide because you're that rich. But yeah, 0.02% chance I'm going to get one, so very unlucky. Fragment cast speed, multi, and a resistance you need. This build, again, does struggle pretty heavily with resistances because everything you're wearing is unique, so they don't provide passive resistances. So maybe Void Res, Necrotic Res, Fizz Res, something useful. On your red ring, if you're lucky enough to have 1 LP, you ideally want to try to slam int, and if you miss int, hopefully you have some lightning damage on there as a second mod. If not, any resistance is not the worst thing, but you ideally really want int if you happen to get a red ring with LP on it. Strand of Souls, cooldown recovery speed, super not necessary. You don't need it at all. I missed my slam. Ideally here, you want to either have lightning damage, mana regen's not bad if you happen to be struggling with mana regen, although it's going to be temporary, or some other defensive mod or resist, like elemental resistance or reduced damage from crits. Anything really here works. I don't think there's something, that's better than everything else. I would personally have slammed lightning damage on this, but any one of those is probably going to work. For your star dial, int, definitely important, and ideally if you get a 2LP, int and lightning damage, those are going to be great. And then pretty much anything else I would not use. You're mainly going to use this if you roll T7 int on it. On the gloves, we already spoke about cast speed, int, reduced damage taken from crits and armor, and the resistance you need. Blood of the Exile boots, you're going to want int movement speed. If you happen to come across 3LP, int movement speed and some resistance would be really nice. I happen to miss my slam. I hit Fizz Res, which I kind of need, so it's not the worst thing ever, but yeah, int priority, and then movement speed. Twisted Heart, of course. I'm not going to say it's mandatory here that you get +4 to Frostclaw. 3 will work, but you're going to be missing a point, which ends up costing either more mana or you will do less damage, so ideally you hit +4 here. And if you happen to be godly at slamming, +4 and int is what you want to hit. As for idols, so I'm personally using 2 of these, which is the % armor, % mana, and increased crit chance with lightning skills. If you aren't going for the 300 mana threshold, I don't think you need these anymore, these suffixes, although they are still really nice. These are sort of the best thing you can put on if you're going for that, maxing out the crit strike with lightning skills and getting you ideally want 8% armor mana to make sure you hit the threshold. And then efficiency and lightning damage. Now the efficiency is very important. You want to try and get that to 14 if you can. Helps out a ton with mana issues, although mine aren't 14 and I'm not struggling at all. And then if you're going for the 300 mana threshold damage increase, you want to get this mod. If you aren't, then any other mod is probably viable, including this one, even if you're not stacking the mana, is pretty good. And then for the last slots, you can do whatever you want. You can fill resistances that you need. I've got Necrotic in here, Void, and Cold Res. Feel free to mix and match that as you see fit. And since I'm not getting Aegis anymore, the cast speed is useless for me, so I'm going to swap this out for something else that gives me Cold Res, but yeah, that's pretty much it. As for blessings in general, if you're COF, there's nothing better than getting increased experience. It literally translates to favor, but irrelevant for the build. This is irrelevant. Crit strike multi here, highly advisable. It's a lot of multi. If you don't feel like you need the multi because you've got so fucking much, the spell damage leech's health is very nice. This converts to ward as well. So this is a very nice thing to have while you're clearing monoliths. Outside of that, crit strike chance to help you yourself cap crit is really nice. Nothing else here is really important. This is irrelevant as well. As we discussed before, mana, if you don't feel like going for the shred, if you want to go for the shred, take this one instead. Those are the only two ones that actually matter. Increased lightning damage while you're trying to look for the other two is probably worth. All resists. There's nothing here outside of all resists that actually matters. You don't want to take anything else. This is super, super helpful. Helps you round out your resistances in an already sort of tight build. So that's the one you want. And then for these two, I think taking the percent armor and flat armor is by far the best choice. If you want to sacrifice the armor for a resistance, like a resistance, temporarily, go for it. But you shouldn't have to. You should look to get some of these, or these two specifically, with like a high roll if possible. Now that that's out of the way, I was going to show a T4 jeweler kill, but that would require me editing this video longer than I want to, so I'm just going to do a monolith. If you want to see a T4 jeweler kill, as with recent gear, you can visit my channel. There's a 22-second kill on there that you can check out. We're just going to clear a monolith just to show you what the playstyle's like, and if I have a boss, I'll edit that in as well, and I'll also link the Orobyss I was speaking about before. But essentially, when you get into maps, you want to get your Rowan's up, and then you want to just, you know, flame dash around, and then you're pretty much off to the races. If you take a big hit from something or get stunned, you'll hear that noise of like tink, and then if you don't have flame ward up, think about pushing it. Otherwise, you're pretty much safe to go. So this is the mapping experience. You're literally dashing around, holding down Frostclaw, and then when you're... I'm trying to find like a group of mobs here to sort of demonstrate what it's like to take some damage, but the corruption's getting to a point with my gear now where it doesn't feel very difficult anymore. It just sort of like breezes through these maps. So yeah, you don't have to push it too often, but if you do and you're dashing around with my star dial up, I'm at like close to 900 ward retention, which is absolutely insane. 888 ward retention currently. That'll probably go down if I get the Eternal Gauntlets rolled properly, because you're going to lose the 5 attributes on Swaddling and Explicit mod, but that's pretty much it. Snap Freeze is really nice to freeze enemies. They literally just sit there and do nothing. Take advantage of that. This also works for bosses as well. So when you're, you know, against the Reign of Dragons boss and she's casting that big AoE, you can freeze the boss and she will do nothing for like probably 5 seconds. This build has like innate freeze rate multiplier as well, so the freeze is not like super short. It's actually a significant amount of time that you'll freeze bosses and enemies for, so make sure you're taking advantage of that. There you go. That's pretty much it. That's 1562 corruption or something like that. It feels very smooth. You're really not worried about dying. The only things that really kill this build are damage over time, like I was saying before, and things like explosive ground, which you can't see because the build does just like way too much AoE damage, or just AoE effects where you can't see shit. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I will also link the guide that I'm writing in the description if it gets posted, and I will keep this up to date as much as possible. And if you guys comment and figure something new out that's super epic, I will also adjust that. And once again, the credit for this initial build's creation is SMK and Machin. They're the original designers of this build. I'm simply just trying to push it even further. And since they stopped playing, I'm going ahead and just posting the information out there because the build's really fucking awesome. And it's the only reason I'm still really playing Last Epoch at this very moment before PoE prep. So hope you guys enjoy it. I apologize for the long video. I just wanted to clear the air and sort of get that message out there. And yeah, hope you enjoy.